Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. You heard the opening statements from our panel. Now we're going to jump in, and we want you to kind of speak from the heart, but obviously speak to the areas that you feel most passionately about. The topic of education came out, and what we talked about was soft skills. Has the educational model in Bermuda prepared Bermudians for leadership? We understand that we have those getting the bachelor's, the master's, PhDs, in fact. But are they being prepared to be drones? Or are they being prepared to be leaders? Everyone don't jump to the mic at one time.
Well, I'll start it off. If you go and have a look at the educational system, say going back 25 years. I'm trying to think of when I was in high school, maybe a little longer than that. I'm sort of lying. My colleague back there, she can correct me if I'm wrong. At that time, when you look at the results, specifically between the public and the private schools, the public schools were doing extremely well. And so something has happened since then. One of my roles when I was at the Department of Statistics was to write a report on adult literacy and life skills. And what we found was that although there is so much talk about educational deficiency in Bermuda, that report actually found that there was very little difference between blacks and whites in the educational system, which spoke to a larger problem. If there is very little in terms of education and life skills, why is it that the outcomes are so much different? Why is there such a great disparity? And then we went on from there, looking at the Mincy report a few years ago, which found that there was a great disparity, again, with regards to the races. But when you looked at the education, the disparity was very minimal. The outcomes of that, or the results of that study, indicated that one of the biggest disparities in terms of outcomes was in terms of the job choice, and that's another debate as to why people go into different jobs, or why they feel they shouldn't go into different jobs. The other part was racism played a real role in terms of educational, or certainly financial outcomes. Twice the amount in terms of education. So essentially speaking, if you remove or you fix the educational piece, you would still get disparities. And so I think that is where the country is. You can get education, but what you're told is that you're not good enough for the top places. So we can't get a Bermudian to fill the Bermuda Tourism Authority. We can't get a Bermudian to fill the head of education. And there are a number of posts that you can't seem to get a Bermudian ahead of, when they seem to have the education. If you look at the census results, blacks by far have the highest level of education in terms of PhDs. So the education piece, or to answer the question, has a public, or has education prepared us? I think whether or not it has prepared us, we have gone on and prepared ourselves. But what we found is that when we come back, there's a different story.
Very profound points. Anybody else? Jason.
Education is a portion, but education doesn't define leadership. When you look in terms of education, you have persons who are extremely intelligent in our community that don't necessarily ascend to leadership positions. I don't associate top managers within businesses as leaders. Leadership is something unique. This person's influence, motivate, these type of things. You don't have to be the top of on the top of an institution to be a leader within that institution. And if I say, does our education system prepare us to be leaders? I don't think it does. Some of the leaders in schools were simply as your hair boy and hair girl. Those are leadership positions. Does my hair boy and hair girl from high school turn out to be a leader in another institution when they get old? If the answer to the question was you find a high percentage of those individuals, yes, then you find that placing persons as prefects and stuff and giving them leadership roles in school then prepares them for leadership roles at other school. What you do is you have some persons that come out of the education system who have exceptional academic qualifications and don't have the willingness to step up to take on real leadership responsibilities. So I don't think the two are always correlated, education and leadership.
Jason, if I can just ask you a question then based on that point. Do you think in Bermuda we run from leadership?
I believe based in the system that we operate in, sometimes it's not even in the back of some person's mind to ascend to leadership, even if the person has the ability. If that person is not pushed into a leadership position, I don't think that they're interested. Most times, you have to either push or press persons to go into leadership positions in this country, I believe, rather than persons wanting to just ascend to those positions.
Mr. Tweed, Reverend Tweed.
I think if you look historically at education in Bermuda, the periods in which, and I'll speak specifically now in regards to black people, the periods in which black people made the most progress in Bermuda were periods in which you had the most segregated education system. There's a reason for that. The purpose of overall education is essentially to condition and train people, to use your term, to be drones or to be good citizens. But if your education system is a product of not being included in the dominant society, then the purpose of your education is to empower your people and equip them to liberate themselves. Hence, when you look at that generation of people that went to Berkeley when schools were segregated, or went to Central and Elliott, the kind of education that they received, where even though it wasn't on the curriculum, they were given an understanding that empowered them to understand that there were black Bermudians that were ingenious, that were creative, that were entrepreneurial, and that there were no barriers or boundaries that they could not cross. Now, once education begins to be integrated, you gradually begin to change the values, the goal, and the vision of the persons now being educated. So now you have people that, to me, it seems, are educated more to stay in their place. You don't have people that are educated to question boundaries, to challenge systems. And education is a small part of an overall system of power. And unless we understand how education participates in creating and maintaining particular systems of power, we're going to continue to keep putting the same stuff in, and we'll get the same stuff out.
Very interesting. Any other comments?
Yeah, I'm gonna kind of take this from a different angle. Obviously, if you've read my bio, I went to an all-girls school on the island, and I'm gonna shoot this from the perspective and not undervaluing the importance of an all-girls education, because I would submit that an all-girls education helps women assume roles of leadership. Just thinking of a curriculum that I'm very closely related to, in a particular school on island, they allow women to, and their girls, to assume positions of leadership, which helps to prepare them for assuming societal roles of leadership. So I think, again, presenting the opportunities for women to not only flourish in an all-girls environment, but also giving them the confidence to assume those roles of leadership cannot be underestimated. So I don't want to maybe detract too much from what my fellow panel members were sharing, but also just really wanting to convey the importance of all-girls education and leadership, because all-girls education does result in confident young women who are assuming roles of leadership in our community and on the international stage.
I'd like to just add one piece to what Jason has stated. I fundamentally agree with what he had put forth, in that, I believe that you have to split education into two components. It's what happens at home, and then is what happens in what we call the education system, right? My wife and I, we are his first educators. I have a son who's 13. We are the first educators. And so everything that comes out of his character is stuff that I am actively trying to put into his character. So those leadership qualities, traits, and abilities that I want to see in him, I nurture that in him. I also actively try to shape his view of things until such time when he can academically shape it for himself. I play a very active role in that. Right or wrong, that's what I do. So what happens in the school is one component. I think where we've fallen down is what happens in the home, right? That component stopped or changed or diminished, yeah? We have to tell our children what it is that they're capable of and not necessarily rely on someone else to do that piece for us.
Can I then say that we're putting too much, are you saying we're putting too much responsibility on society and or the educational system to develop our leaders? By inference, are you suggesting that?
What I am saying is that we should expect from our education system that produces the types of leaders that Bermuda needs. But what I'm saying is that has to happen first with me, just in case the system doesn't do what it is that it's supposed to do. I just feel like, that safety net needs to be with me. And the last piece that I would say is, to Jason's point earlier as well, was a good education is fantastic, but it doesn't mean that you will be a good leader. Full stop. Good leadership comes out of things like integrity and compassion and empathy, your willingness to put yourself in the shoes of another person and respond accordingly. Education doesn't necessarily teach you those things. And so you can produce an army of PhDs, but without empathy, without integrity, and without compassion, you will have what we've seen.
Marlon, I think for me not to stay where you've put us right now wouldn't be a good idea. Have we put too much emphasis in the broader sense on education as opposed to character development and creating leaders?
I'd say yes. Listen, if you take someone who's been developed, his character has been developed, it's been nurtured, he will rise to the top. There are people who are running Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 companies who do not have college degrees. It's a fact. Even here in Bermuda, it's a fact. Because what they do have is valuable. Yeah? How to take a crowd of people and motivate them to achieve an objective. That doesn't necessarily come through a college course. You can read about it, but it doesn't necessarily produce that result. You have to have the ability to impose your will and motivate people. That is leadership.
Anybody else? I know we spent a little time. Anybody on Chen? Then we go.
Just briefly, I don't think we should or can underestimate the importance of education. Just speaking from my professional background, we can't get you in the door, we can't recruit you unless you meet the minimum standards required to get you in the door. So we can't promote you to become a leader within a law firm unless you're a qualified lawyer. And because of that, we should and we must place considerable importance on education. Responding to Reverend Tweed's point, I'm not a child of the segregation. Fortunately, I was born well after that, and so were my peers. But I think what was important for us was that we had education available to us, but education was not the be-all and the end-all. It was a very important step or a springboard, I should say, that propels you into the air. And I think like Marlon says, once you get propelled into the air, there's a whole lot of other things that you do need to be mindful of in order to ensure that you rise through the ranks. And I'm speaking to myself when I say this, and we'll probably get on to discussing these more specific issues, but I'm speaking about things like the ability and the importance of networking and building networks and identifying mentors and sponsors, things that you might not be taught during your law degree, but you still need the law degree, but they're things that are nonetheless important for you to propel yourself through the legal profession at least.
I'm sorry, really quickly, just want to clarify that I wasn't saying character building in place of an education. I don't believe the two are mutually exclusive. I just want to clarify that. Absolutely get the education, but character building, it produces leaders. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, so just to answer, I guess, the original question, is the education system doing enough to develop leaders? Obviously, education is important. I think our education is actually making progress. We're actually moving along a spectrum, and we need to make sure that we're developing students that are relevant to the times that we're in now. So I think kind of we're not just focusing on education and in the classroom kind of tuition, but we're also looking at developing the whole person. So we're actually getting people out into the community. We're getting people to make connections with business leaders. We're getting people to actually do work terms. Those things are very important, and also kind of teaching the soft skills and how do you interact in a business environment. So I think our education is kind of on a path where it's actually developing. We've gone away from when I went to school where you went to class, you sat down for 6 or 7 hours, you did tuition, and then you went home. The requirements to actually graduate now is actually kind of getting out into the community, kind of getting engaged with the community, and then moving ahead from there. And then if you take that a step further, all these scholarship requirements nowadays, like the scholarship that we have at KPMG, we evaluate people on academic achievement, we evaluate people on personality, because if you don't have the right personality, then it doesn't make sense coming to the firm. And we also evaluate people on leadership. What kind of things have you done as a leader? Have you been a house captain? Have you, whatever it is, kind of. So the criteria that we're holding students to now is actually forcing schools to actually look at these things to make sure the students are relevant going forward.